Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now, if you watched the last episode, we finished off by planning what we were going to do with our drive shaft situation. And like I said last time, I'm not going to wait for my machine shop to get it done. So I'm just going to keep working on the car, crossing off all the things we need to do to get this thing functional again. And I think we're going to start this episode with the exhaust. So first off, let's get this guy up in the air so we have a little more room, and I'll bring the factory exhaust underneath it so we can see where we go from there. So our first step is going to be to remove these joints and take off the two little stubs that were left behind by our environmentally conscientious catalytic converter recyclers. And then after that, we can hook back up the 8 rearmost mounts to hold the pipe back in place. And then this guy here, if you remember from episode 1, this was actually another mount that was on the BMW transmission crossmember, which is no longer there, but we still have those two little flanges that are welded in place. So once we have everything hooked up to the bottom of the car, we can simply make a new exhaust crossmember. If you watched the last episode, that's why I didn't paint my transmission crossmember, because I figured that we would hang the exhaust off of it. So once we have the pipe in place, held up by those guys, we can take this one out and figure out which shape we need now for it to come close to our transmission crossmember and devise some sort of mount to put it in place. So let's get that done. Well, it would appear we have here yet another not so subtle hint that the BMW engineers wanted you to put a Chevy driveline in this thing. So I've got all of my rear mount in position, holding the exhaust pipe where it goes. And if you remember, this little pin I said was where the factory mount was hanging from the BMW crossmember, which is no longer there. So I was thinking we're going to have to modify that thing. This is the mount in question. It slides on the pin like so. And now if we raise the pipe into position, and we center it. Now, I don't know if you guys will hear this, but that's the sound of that mount hitting our cross member. In other words, this will be very easy to fit. All I'm going to do, if you guys can imagine that this is our cross member, the 1x1, I'm going to mark where the mount needs to be when I have my pipe centered. And then I'm going to drill a hole through my 1x1 so that I can put in a 10mm bolt through the 1x1. I will then weld the head to the 1x1 to make it a permanent stud. And now if I'm being honest, like right now, with the mount touching the cross member, I'm like dead flush with the end of the pin. So honestly, it should be in a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is add a nut to said stud, weld the nut to the 1x1 so it becomes a permanent spacer. And then we can just put our mount on there, put a nut to hold it in place, and we'll have our exhaust hanger mounted in position.
5 minutes later.
Like so. And now all we have to do is make the two head pipes to go meet our headers. So as we've previously discussed, the passenger side is going to be a little bit easier. I'll give you guys a couple of references. If you guys are working on your own exhaust, there is a website called blocklayer.com that has a whole bunch of calculators for guys that do construction or fabrication, and it has a section for metal tubing where it'll give you calculations for proper miter, and then it'll trace out a template for you. So you just put in information like the size of pipe you're working on, the angle you wanted, that kind of stuff, and it'll give you a template. Now, some tips and tricks to using that stuff. If you guys have ever noticed when you print something out, sometimes it skews the image a little bit. So all of their templates on that website will have a scale. So once you print it out, you can compare it to a known good ruler, right? You want to make sure that their scale and your measurement is exactly the same. If not, you reprint it and you adjust the percentage to make it a few percent bigger, a few percent smaller until the scale is correct. And then you can cut out this template and use it. So like we discussed last time, when I put my head pipe in there, my flange here is past the firewall, but the firewall is fairly close and I don't have a whole lot of clearance, so I wanted to start angling down a little bit. So what I did is I printed out a template at 155 degrees, and then I cut it down. I just kept the actual shape that it gives me so I can wrap it around the pipe. You just butt up the ends of the paper so it's in a straight line, trace around it, and then you can just cut it off with a cut-off wheel and a die grinder, like so. And then you end up with a very accurate cut, even for having done it just with a cutoff wheel. So it's a very good resource. They have a few different types of calculators. So now that we have this cut to the right angle, again, the header and the head pipes on these are 2.5 inch, whereas our BMW exhaust is 2.25. So what I'm going to do is take a little piece of 2.5 inch exhaust, weld it onto here, and that I have my angle to make it angle down slightly. And then in my 2.25 inch exhaust kit, my 45 actually has a piece that is flared out so that it can slide onto another 2.25, which made it practically slide into the 2.5 pipe. So what I did is I expanded one section of 2.5 a little bit so I can slide this guy in and out. So once I have this piece welded onto my flange, I can bolt it in place up there, and then I can slide this guy in and play with it like in and out so that this end of the pipe ends up in line with our BMW pipe, and then I'll just have to weld a little extension for them to meet. And honestly, I also ordered a set of 2-bolt, 2.25 inch stainless steel exhaust flanges, just because I don't want to weld these guys all in one piece. I get it. If it was all one piece, I'd have less chance of having any kinds of leak, but that also means that I'd have to struggle with the entire length of exhaust pipe to mate up to our headers, which would be a pain in the butt. This way I'm going to make these two little pipes removable so we can put the whole back pipe in and then just have to bolt these guys up to match. So since this one's a little easier to do, let me do this one off camera real quick, and then we'll attack the driver's side because that one's going to be a lot more complicated.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
There. So now I have this pipe cut, trimmed, tack welded into place, minus my 2-bolt flange, like I said, that I ordered. One thing I also forgot to mention, I put in a little flex joint in there. You want to make sure you put a flex joint in there, because or else anytime your engine tries to rotate on its mount because of the torque, it's also trying to rock the entire exhaust. So that puts a lot of stress on your exhaust and on your exhaust manifold. So you might have something crack. If you put a flex joint, well, like it says, it flexes, so it absorbs the vibration from the engine and does it transfer it into the exhaust. So it'll make your exhaust last longer. So now on to our driver's side. Like we said, when I had this guy bolted to the engine, I said the optimal angle would have been if this curve here would have kept going down at the same angle instead of trying to straighten back out. Now I looked to see if I could somehow cut my primary tubes and move the collector a little bit inward, but because of the angles, I would have to modify the primary tubes a whole lot. So I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to just cut the back end of my collector at an angle and then try to extend onto that. Now here it is still going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt because the collector has to be shaped a little like a 4-leaf clover, if you will, because it has to wrap around the 4 primary tubes. So it's going to take a little bit of massaging to get that done. And then even when I'm done with that, we still have some interference because of our steering shaft. So again, I could heat it to red hot and like kind of dimple it with a ball peen hammer. Or I think what I'm going to do is just cut off, like I said, weld in my extension and then figure out where I need the clearance. And again, just cut out a little section of it, weld in a piece of pipe upside down so it creates a dimple just to clear our shaft. And that will probably be our best bet. So this is going to take a while. So I'm going to do that off camera as well. I'll come show you when I'm done.
Meanwhile,
now here's one thing we can check off our to-do list, and that is our steam port. Now on the stock Silverado, this steam port is connected. I forget if it's connected to the top of the radiator or to the overflow tank, but the idea of the steam port is that you do not want the highest point of your cooling system to be in the engine, or else you could get air bubbles trapped in the water jacket of the cylinder heads. So this is supposed to let any bubble escape and go back to the cooling system so it can go eventually end up in your overflow tank. If you guys are working on a different project, they do sell this fitting that you can splice into the upper rad hose. You simply cut the hose, put the fitting in, and use that little port in the center to connect your steam port to. But in this case, we won't even have to go this far. If you guys are working on this platform, there is going to be a very easy solution. So I've removed the throttle body on our BMW engine so you guys could see a little bit better. But as it turns out, our little German friend here also has a steam port. It goes here to here. There's that little Y fitting right there. And then there's this hose that connects to the overflow tank on the passenger inner fender. So BMW uses these crimped on hose clamp except down here at the head. So I'll take this entire hose out, but I'm pretty sure that if we cut it down here, we'll be able to slip this part over our steam port and just connect the other end with the quick coupler directly to our overflow tank the way BMW originally designed. So that should be pretty easy. So let's see if my idea pans out. So we're going to test this where it goes. And okay. It won't be that easy, but the idea still works. Okay, this just brings this hose, like apparently the BMW engine is further forward, right? It probably sits like that on the Beamer. The only thing is that this brings the hose directly in line with our belt, which is kind of risky for no good reason. But if we cut it here where I'd said when we put it on our steam port, like I had said, like, yes, this is too far forward, but that just means that we only need to cut out a section out of the hose here and butt it back together so that this rides a little bit closer to the head, say like so. You get the idea, right? So that will still work. And that will be our steam port properly plumbed. So at least one problem solved. So another part of our conversion we're going to have to address is going to be this hose over here. So this hose on BMW had this quick coupler. And on the BMW application, that quick coupler was for this shorter hose here, right? They connected there. And the other end was because on the BMW, there's a hard line with the coupler down here that actually runs underneath the intake manifold through the valley and connects directly to the back of the water pump outlet for the heater core. Now, of course, our LS doesn't have that. So because that quick coupler over here looks kind of bulky and that fitting's not the prettiest thing in the world, I'm thinking I'm probably just going to cut it down here and splice it there. Now, you guys could take just a length of 3/4 inch heater hose and just run around the outside and connect it to the outlet on the water pump. I'm probably going to take the time to order some hard line and bend me a hard line to go around up to here, and then just use about a foot of rubber hose to make the final connection. You always need to have some rubber hose in there so that it can compensate a little bit for the engine rocking on its mount, like we said before. So that'll take care of that hose at least. The other end will do once our cooling system is back in place. I will also make a little sheet metal bracket behind this head so I can attach my dipstick for my transmission, right? Out of sight, but still easily accessible. And we can take care of that before we finally mount our intake manifold. But speaking of which, ta-da! And of course, now that I'm recording this video, a lot of guys on eBay have actually updated their listing. So now you guys get to see what it looks like. But honestly, like the silver one is actually more like a polished aluminum, so it looks more like chrome. So I might have still gone with this one. Although sanding every nook and cranny on this guy to get it painted was not fun. Now, before I throw this guy on, it has an opening in the back for the map sensor for our port. So if your LS engine came with this map sensor, you won't be able to reuse it because these guys are made to snap into the plastic manifold. So you need this map sensor instead. And then we can put that in here. A little bolt. That way the bolt can hold it in place. And then there's also one vacuum port back there, which I don't know, I might plug off, or if I can find a 90-degree elbow with a barb fitting, I might use that to plumb the vacuum line for our brake booster. But for now, so that fits my little paint scheme a whole lot better. Now I won't bolt it down until we've plumbed our other vacuum lines to the bottom. And let's remember, our kit also came with fuel rails, which are probably going to end up getting painted as well. But for now, let's try mocking up our fuel system. So I'm pretty sure I'll be able to reuse my LC9 injectors. The LC9 uses EV6 type injectors, which I'm pretty sure this is what this manifold was designed to use. And the LC9, I'll have to cross-check my part numbers to make sure, but the LC9 was supposed to come with 36 pound per hour injectors, which should be good enough for our power level. You might want to cross-reference based on the injectors you have with your engine. Some LSs came with 30 pounds an hour injectors, which should still be good enough for this level, but you're getting awfully close. So how do you know if you have the right size injectors for the application you're running? Rule of thumb, you're supposed to have 1/2 pound of fuel on a naturally aspirated engine, 1/2 pound of fuel per horsepower. So you take the amount of horsepower you think you're going to have. Like let's say, well, let's put it generously and go to 450. Divide that by 2 or multiply that by 1/2 pound of fuel per hour. We're looking at 225 pounds of fuel per hour to make 450 horsepower. Divided by 8 cylinders, you get up right in the high 20s. So 30, you're awful close. 36, you got plenty of leeway. And how do you know for sure that you have big enough injectors? Once the car is running under full load, wide open throttle, when you're making the most horsepower you can possibly can, you want to go look at the duty cycle of this guy. So the duty cycle is the percentage of time that they are on, and you never want to see more than 80%. The reason for that is that if you're at 80% and something happens that causes a lean mixture, your computer will be able to bump up the numbers to correct the lean mixture, because lean tends to burn hotter, which is what tends to melt holes in parts, right? But if you're already running at, I don't know, let's say 97% duty cycle, well, if something goes wrong and it goes lean, the computer is not going to be able to compensate for the lean mixture. I'm getting it all she's got, Captain. And it will go kablooey. So if some of you guys have never removed injectors before, let's say you want to reuse your injectors, the injectors are made to come out with the fuel rail. So you remove the 4 bolts that hold the rail to the manifold, and then you pull out in a straight line. These are held in, the O-ring kind of squeezes into the manifold. Then you want to inspect your O-rings because they are supposed to be reusable, except if, like this one here, they are damaged, or like the rest of them, they look like they've been there so long that they've practically fossilized. Right, so I am going to need a new O-ring kit because these are really bad. And then how do you remove the injectors from the rail? You need a screwdriver, and then you need to get in there and pry between this little clip and the rail. Remove that clip. Careful not to send it flying across the room. Now, of course, in this application, we won't need the clips anymore. And then again, the O-ring is what holds it squeezed inside the rail, so you twist while pulling. And there you go. Now, since like I said, some of my O-rings are damaged, I'm not going to use those for mock-up just so it doesn't actually induce an error in our setup. So first off, let's mount 4 of these. I picked the 4 best one. Let's mount 4 of these into our rail. So for those of you who haven't done this before, a well-known trick, if you use silicone-based grease on the O-rings, it helps them go in and out a lot easier. And it won't hurt the O-rings, it won't make them swell or nothing. So do like that, and then just squeeze this little guy in there, providing it fits. Yes, it does. So let's do the other 3. Now that that's done, our kit also came with 6 little chrome standoffs, so we are going to attach them like so with the longer bolts, lock washers, and nuts. Now let's see if that really is the type of injectors we need, or if they're too short for the application. Wah, wah. So they are too short. Now, LS engines have also used EV1s and Multec style injectors, which are both longer than these. So now we can admit defeat and find new injectors, or we can just probably make our standoffs a little shorter. So let's see if this end of the injector fits tightly in the manifold. And it does snap in. So I'm going to have to check based on the length of an EV6 and based on the length of the standoff. Are they designed for EV1s or Multec? And honestly, though, I think I'm probably just going to make shorter standoff and use my EV6 injectors anyways. So I'll let you know what I figure out. Okay, so with all 4 injectors in place and the rail mounted, it would appear our standoffs are about 1 inch too long, which means that this system was designed for EV1 injectors. So if you take injectors from the later year LS1 or the LS6 with this part number, they would be 30 pound an hour injectors, EV1, so you could use this kit and it would bolt on as is. All I'm going to do is make standoffs that are 1 inch shorter, and I'll be able to. use my EV6 36 pounds per hour injectors instead. Now the kit also comes with a couple of AN6 fittings. Some guys might tell you AN6 is too small. AN6 can float up to about 600 horsepower, so for us it'll be fine. Our fuel line from the BMW comes up here. So with the fittings I have, and they also gave us this lovely AN line to cross over from one rail to the other. I wonder if, oh, that's gonna fit just right. So I'll be able to snake from one rail to the other by just barely running underneath our throttle body. So we'll be able to connect the BMW fuel line to the back of this rail, then we'll feed this one through this hose and go to the other side, and we can cap the back end over there. Note to future self, before I run any fuel through that system, I'm going to have to remove the back seat. I'm sure BMW has an access panel to get to the fuel tank back there. I'm going to have to drain this fuel tank, clean it out, and put fresh fuel in there, because at this point the fuel in the tank is probably a year old. So we don't want to run that through our new system. But this should work really good. And there. So I actually get to prove my theory. It turns out our little German friend over there uses EV1 type injectors. So I took some out of there, and they do fit the manifold and the rail with the standoffs as supplied. So technically speaking, either one of them would work. I am, however, still going to go with my LS injectors for two main reasons. First off, I know for a fact that those are 36 pounds an hour injectors, whereas the BMW, the internet seems to be a little confused about what is actually supplies. Some guys say 30, some guys say 32, some guys say 36, some guys say 42. So I'm not exactly sure, but seeing as the 4.8 is fairly close in size and the horsepower difference is not terrible, I'm thinking it's probably close enough. You'd probably be okay. But then again, the reason why I'm going to go with the Chevy one mostly is that down the line, when I'm driving this thing around, if something were to happen, the chances that my local parts store has a Chevy injector on the shelf are far more likely than them having a BMW injector. So for serviceability, I'm going to go with the Chevy one just to make sure.
Meanwhile,
and I will mention this for those of you that live in states that have mandatory smog testing or stuff like that. So on our BMW engine, we also have this port over here. That's the vacuum hose that feeds our evap purge valve on the front of the driver's side head. Now, we're not going to be using any of those components, but the hoses that connects over here to this guy is the evap purge line that goes all the way to the gas tank. So if we come back to the car, we're talking about this hose here, which is a short U-shaped nylon hose that has another quick coupler right here near the driver's side shock tower. Now on your LS, if you have a Gen 4 truck manifold like I do, your evap purge valve is right up here, and it has this little hose that connects to a port directly behind the throttle body on the intake manifold. If you have a Gen 3 LS, the valve is built so it bolts directly to the intake manifold in this location. And then in the back of this valve next to the connector, there's a vacuum connection here. So this hose would have to be connected to this one, and then you can make the evap system work from the LS ECM. If you do that, however, you're going to have to find the connections from the BMW ECM to control the evap solenoid valve, which is the one underneath the car near the gas tank, and then rewire those connections into the LS evap vent solenoid control wiring diagram. And that would allow you to run evap with the LS ECM. Now, if you're planning on using the fabricated low-profile intake manifold like I got, you could simply buy an evap purge valve from a Gen 4 like this one, and you could mount it even here on the inner fender, plumb this vacuum line to the back of it, and then just run a normal vacuum hose from the front of it to one of the vacuum ports underneath your fabricated intake manifold. Another one that's going to need to be routed to one of those vacuum ports underneath the fabricated manifold is going to be this hose right here. So on the truck manifold, at least for a Gen 4, there's a hose that goes to the top. I think it's the same on a Gen 3. And that is simply the vacuum for your PCV system. So on a Gen 4, you have this hose over here in the front that connects somewhere to your air plenum going to your air box. On the BMW application, the air box is on the driver's side, so we're going to have to relocate that hose. We'll see. You can relocate the hose to the plenum. That's the way you should do it. Or honestly, you can just add a little breather filter on that side to keep it from breathing outside air. You don't want sand and dirt getting in your engine. The benefit of running the hose to the plenum is that technically if it is plumbed into the plenum downstream of the mass airflow sensor, then technically the air that gets used for the PCV system has already been calculated by the sensor and the ECM. So it won't affect your mixture. But honestly, even if you just put a little breather on that side directly on that hose, your O2 sensor will be able to make up the difference in the mixture. So it's simply up to you which one you prefer to do. And then what else? Another vacuum port we're going to need is this hose here, which, holy smoke, nylon hose must have been on sale that day at BMW, right? So that long thing goes to our brake booster. So again, this one we're going to have to reroute somehow to one of those vacuum ports underneath our fabricated intake manifold. Okay, so I know there's already guys scratching their head. Why would you bother with evap? And I get it. Like I said, I live somewhere where there's no mandatory inspection for smog, so I'm not gonna plumb it in, but some of you guys might need it. So if you've ever dropped gasoline on the ground, I'm sure you've noticed that stuff evaporates pretty quick. So the whole point of the evap system is simply to keep all of the gasoline fumes from the fuel tank and keep them from escaping into the atmosphere. If you think of it, when you shut down your car in the evening, everything cools down, everything contracts, right? And then the next day when the sun comes up, it gets up to 110 degrees in the shade. The fuel in the tank is going to want to expand. So the vapors inside the tank have to be able to go somewhere. Now you can't just vent that out to the atmosphere. In a modern day car, those fumes are run through a charcoal canister. The activated charcoal inside the canister absorbs the gasoline vapors. And then when you are running your car, that valve opens up and it takes some vacuum to actually suck those gasoline fumes out of your gas tank, run them through the engine, burn them, and then your catalytic converter can get rid of any toxic stuff that gets emitted from burning them, right? So that's all that evap does. It doesn't really affect drivability. It is strictly an emission issue. Well, I started explaining the tree hugger stuff. Might as well keep going. So PCV stands for positive crankcase ventilation. So same idea again. In our crankcase, we're going to have some vapors in there. Same thing again. When you shut the car off at night, it cools down. If the air cools down, you might have condensation. You'd have water droplets going in your oil, contaminating it. Same thing whenever your engine's running. There's always going to be some fuel that's going to manage to get past the rings and leak down into your crankcase. So again, gasoline dilutes oil. So you don't want that. So if the air in your crankcase was always the same air, warming up, cooling down, warming up, cooling down, you keep having evaporation, condensation, evaporation, condensation. Eventually, it would contaminate your oil. It would ruin your oil. So the idea of PCV is that we take in preferably fresh air, filtered air. It goes down the oil drain back holes on one side, across the crankcase, up the oil drain back on the other side, and then that vacuum line takes it to the intake so it can run through the engine, get burnt, get processed by the catalytic converter, and that's how the engine gets rid of those harmful vapors from the crankcase.
Meanwhile,
so as far as the exhaust goes, this is what I ended up with. So you can see my collector is extended downward, and I've extended it long enough that the flange is actually past the firewall. And for clearance for my steering shaft, I've got my little recess here. Now, for those of you that are saying that it's going to restrict flow, like a little bit, I admit, but there's enough room before the primary hits the recess where the flow of gas can actually move around, right? It's not like it dead ends right into my my recess. It's a curve, so it flows a little bit better. Yes, it will impede flow, but hey, I need the space. I need the space. Got to find some way of getting around it. And we also get our two little head pipes where our O2 sensor bungs located in. So I'm gonna grind and dress my welds off camera. How's that old saying go? A grinder and some paint makes me the welder that I ain't. And I'll give those of you that are rolling on the ground laughing a time to regain your composure. I know. I don't have a TIG welder yet. It's on my wish list to Santa Claus this year. And I think on that, I'm going to let you guys go. I don't even know if this video is going to be long or short or whatever. The thing I'm running into now is that every time I attack something off our to-do list, I do half the work and then I run into a part I need to order. So I've got a bunch of parts on order. I am still picking away at it, so I'm still making content. I will have another video for you guys about that. Right now, I just want to give you guys an update because it's been a little while since I posted a video. So I'll let you go with this for now, and I'll see you next time in the garage.